Welcome to this meeting of Schools Forum. My name is Andrew Neal. I am the chair of Forum, and the event being held here in Kensington Town Hall. It's being streamed live on YouTube, where members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Okay, let's move on to the main body of the meeting. Item A1, apologies for absence. Apologies from Amanda Sayers and Marcin Bucks. Any other apologies, Nina?
No.
And also, I should have done this at the start. A welcome to Nina, who is now clerking Forum henceforth and is part of Luke's team. So, welcome to Forum. Item A2, declarations of interest. Any members of Forum have any interest to disclose? No, okay, great. Okay, 3 minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March. Feels like a lifetime ago. Any comments on the minutes? Peter? No, I haven't read them again because you're very good. You're very good at this.
It was the shortest meeting.
Yeah, it was, but we couldn't break that record tonight.
Yes, I was going to say.
I think Luke might have missed the extra million that was down back at the sofa that we were going to share.
That's why he's on holiday.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, right. So, is it your wish for them to be signed as correct record?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic.
I have read them, Chair.
I didn't doubt you for a second. Item A4, we moved on to I'll sign. DSG outturn school balances.
Yes, so we've got some good news in terms of the outturn position, and that the table one at the bottom of page 7, going on to the next page. This shows the year-end variances with a small underspend on the schools block, where the admissions team, there's been a review of charges between the boroughs in the bi-borough arrangement, and that's reduced the charge to Kensington. And then on the high needs block, we've had an increase in underspend since the last meeting, since the March meeting, by a further £500,000. And that's mainly due to, again, a review of the bi-borough charges in relation to SEN support services, and smaller underspend on hospital placements in relation to the independent sector. And also children, looked after children, we've been forecasting that as break even, and when we got the costs at the year end, we had an underspend there. We are looking to get that on a more regular basis, get that data on a more regular basis. So overall, we've ended up with a 2,143,000 underspend, which has then reduced the deficit to 4,128,000. So this is good news in terms of the overall DSG position. Moving on to the school balances. Some good news and some, more concerning position. So good news in that we've now, compared to 4 schools in deficit at the end of 22-23, we've now only got 2 schools with a deficit balance. And the number of schools that have got excess balances in accordance with the DFE criteria, that number has also reduced as well, down from 15 to 13. On average, primary schools have got a balance of 134,000. We talked extensively at the last meeting about the school balances, school balance form, and that's something that was agreed will be coming in from 26-27. We mentioned that in the scheme paper as well. So we can see that a number of schools are becoming increasingly pressured in terms of their budget position and how much they're using each year. And we have now got, since the paper was written, we've now got the 3-year budget plans, and we've just got one school missing, and we know why that one's not yet in. And that shows that there's 6 schools whose 3-year budget plans show that they would move into deficit within the next 3 years. So we will be supporting those schools in terms of dealing with those potential deficits. They're not deficits yet, but they could become deficits. And we're working with the schools with the deficits and their deficit recovery plan updates. But nothing further to add.
Thanks, Anita. Any questions on balances, David?
Just for consultative, Anita, so some of my peers are consultative, they will inquire when we feed back to them about this meeting, but they will say, so how does that work, in real terms? Is it that you approach them and then you begin the process of a dialogue, or is it that their chairs, finance committees approach Poonam? So they will ask, there will be anxiety amongst some of those kids.
So it can be either way. So we will obviously we're concentrating on the schools that have got deficits already, but we will be contacting them. But often it's the schools that contact us first and can either come to Poonam or Estera, and then meetings and support can be arranged. Yeah, and actually we do. I mean, I think we do find that the schools in Kensington and Chelsea are proactive when they see that they're heading to a more difficult position, which is good. They don't wait for someone else to come and ask them what they're going to do about it. They're thinking about what their plans are going to be.
And I think if I could just add that, obviously both councils have invested in additional resource, which is Estera, who's able to, I think you're very busy in Westminster, to support schools, as you say, David, at that early stage. And again, the other people to turn to are, your named lead advisor, and sometimes schools help us have a joint conversation, perhaps with Estera and with Jane, because obviously heads have got that really difficult job of trying to balance, want to maintain standards, breadth of curriculum, but actually I've got this potential deficit, so the support's there.
With feedback to our peers, I mean, it's difficult because sometimes those meetings are very well attended, sometimes they're not. So it's a mixture of us communicating with that sort of. I mean, I hear what you're saying about it is a very small goal, and the notion of people communicating is very good. But it just takes one school, doesn't it? They're not really aware of that. So we'll do our best to add a positive layer to that.
Sorry.
I could add that we've had a really positive experience working with Estera, and she wasn't. She didn't expect more of us than we needed to give her, and it wasn't under us, and it was useful. Our work with her, so it was really helpful that she conducted herself in the way she did actually. So it was really good. I'll come back to another question, but.
Do you want to just keep going, Jack?
Yeah, my question is really about one particular school, and it's more to do with one school's got into further deficit this year, quite markedly so, as a primary school. And I suppose, as a generic term, what then happens when a school's continuing to get into that situation? What is the next step? How does it work? What do we find out, and how does it? Yeah.
So what can happen, and we've seen it, and I will use, Westminster as an example because we've got more schools in deficit there. So what can happen that when a deficit recovery plan is put together, that the first year, actually the deficit might get worse, because by the time plans have been put into place and agreed, you can't make the change till September or the following January. So So schools, as long as they're, in line with their deficit recovery plan broadly, then so we monitor the position and we're making sure that that's why we ask for monthly returns from deficit schools, and then we check that it's in line with their deficit recovery plan. And at the moment, we don't have any concern in terms of the overall deficit recovery. If we did, it would be, we would be raising concerns and having further meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question about that? What if it gets to the point where schools can't recover? So because to meet actually the statutory obligations, they need a certain amount of money, and I'm wondering at what point that becomes difficult, particularly with following roles.
So ultimately, we would, we'd hope that we don't get to that position, that we're working closely with schools and school standards and sometimes a diocese if that's appropriate. But if it came to that position, we would issue a notice of financial concern and say, these are the things that need to be addressed for us to remove this notice of concern. It is a formal notice of concern.
And what happens, what teeth does that have then in terms of that notice?
Potentially, you could then have a withdrawal of delegation, or we might set up a
management.
management intervention board.
Okay.
But we don't, we'd hope not to get to that position, but we can.
That's going to involve work with governors way before getting down that line.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's,
And I think just
there's
in
a whole
terms of
process there.
absolutely, and again, without kind of going excessively to draw examples from Westminster, often Jackie Saddington is doing quite a lot of work with governing bodies or maybe a governor's working party who are in that situation, sadly, Sarah, and they're thinking about other plans because the getting a balanced 3-year deficit recovery plan isn't working for them as a strategy. So looking at an alternative plan, maybe it's reducing their published admission number, reducing their staffing. In some cases, it's amalgamating with another part of the school where two governing bodies are working together to effectively create one school on one side.
Peter.
Does back to the high needs block, does the 2.098 million underspend last year, will that carry over to the base expenditure in this year? Are we going to see any savings this year, or as a result of the fact that you found at the last meeting some expenditures which weren't continuing?
So the bulk of it is that we talked about at the previous meeting is one-off in relation to when we've done reviews for 22-23 expenditure and that being lower than estimated. But the costs in relation to admissions and the SEN support service, those will be ongoing. So what we're doing is we're starting to look at the forecast for the current year,
Right.
to see what the revised or what the forecast position will be. But it won't be anything like we won't be saying 2.1 million underspend on the high needs block.
Year after year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that okay, Peter?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
David?
This is a question that I know members of the consultative would ask us. So it'd be very remiss if we didn't ask you. If you had to, if there were sort of broad neon lit headlines around the savings made, so the reduction in the deficit, the high needs block, really, how's that been achieved?
Obviously we've got a deficit recovery plan, haven't we? We've brought it here in the autumn and we'll update it again.
Yeah.
Because we have to keep presenting it to the DFE anyway. But I think the most effective reduction was probably the recalibration of the EBT, because we had £1 million of expenditure that we weren't expecting. And then obviously the recalibration work identified where the double counting was. So I think that was a mitigation that we already had in training. And then obviously we received our £1 million grant from the DFE for our work streams. And picking up Peter's point, it's those work streams that are going to give us some savings in the longer term, to a lower scale, but over a longer term. And they're focused on reducing our use of the independent sector and early intervention for our children with speech and language needs. So I think that's probably the glowing
I
headlines.
think what you're saying is that this is not going to be a pattern that we're going to see year after year.
We're not going to get a big
Because
one
we're
off every year. No.
appropriately in year, and that should hopefully continue on in the next couple of years.
So do you mind if I add to what Judy said? The other thing is obviously the opening of Kensington Queen's Mill, because that has reduced the number of children that, while we've still got some going into independent, it has reduced, and that's having an increasing effect each year. So.
Is it worth us admitting that obviously I know officers have worked incredibly hard on this, and I know we really are all trying to do what's best overall in terms of getting this deficit down. But is it worth just logging from the DFE's point of view that this is coming at no small cost to schools and an inclusion of children in schools, and that we need to, we know that that's making life very, very difficult, and how we actually managed to, certainly, anecdotally, I know that it's more and more difficult with funding being so tight, especially around the EBT. And I understand why that is completely. But at the same time, I know it's putting a lot of pressure on schools who are sort of who are the kind of end users of all of this. And I think that's probably worth logging, because DfE are asking us to make the impossible possible, I think. And I know that's no one here's fault.
I would like to reassure you that in all of the planning that we did in our grant application, you know, we highlighted risks and issues, and in the conversations that we're having, that we're still saying, you know, there are incredible pressures on schools, and they have reflected that back to us in conversation. They're hearing it now. I think it's important that we.
I know that everyone in this room cares massively about the children. It's not that, it's just how we get them.
Quarterly monitoring, we make sure it's an quarterly monitoring.
And I think I would say, I mean, I always do acknowledge all the work that Julie and Anita have put in to be able to provide the evidence to draw down £1 million. And that's a set amount for local authorities that are eligible. £1 million goes a bit further in a really small borough like ours. It does just say one of the big shires, but the amount of monitoring my colleagues have to go through, and I know you're both quite keen to talk about some of the changes, some of the benefits and the earlier support. All the DfE are interested in is, why are you spending that money over there? Can't you reduce it to that amount over here?
Exactly.
It is a financial monitoring exercise, and to some extent, you know, sort of like it's quite a resource issue, and maybe there'll be change in the future.
Well, yeah,
in terms of how, you know.
I mean, that would be my question. So imagine Labour government. So imagine different influences on the DfE. Yeah, forecasting and context is everything in this current climate, isn't it? And who knows? And then you just before the meeting you were having a similar conversation, and maybe that is what will happen.
Don't know what'll happen. I think you just need to wait, to be honest.
What was the peak point of our deficit? Was it 10.5 million?
Well, on the unmitigated, it was it would have been 30 million by 2027.
I mean, the actual, not the notional.
I think we were reporting 9 on a trajectory to 12.
Yes.
So we've got it down by 5 million
Yeah.
in 2.5 years.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Now, if on that trajectory, we're going to be post deficit at some point.
But it won't be linear, will it?
No,
we have some
I'm just-
It's a low hanging fruit.
I'm just wondering, could at any point we start thinking about what a post deficit world would look like?
And what we're going to do with the money.
And what we'd be able to do to be able to make things better again, and actually be able to, because that will be something to plan for and think about, and actually think about how we can actually make things better in school.
It's just about forecasting.
I'd wait on the government. I think it's
Not now.
spending a load of time.
But rather than it just coming in as not being planned about it.
And I just wanted, because we've got the High Needs paper coming up, and understandably we've dived into High Needs. Actually, there's quite a bit of recent data about the number of assessment requests and other factors that I'd love us to be in that position.
In that position.
I think given current data from Julie's team, it feels like it's going in the
I
West.
think what Jackie means though is that that's what we do with our 3-year budgets, isn't it? We're forecasting ambitiously. We're looking at, we are aware pragmatically that what we're forecasting may not actually happen. Something untoward might arise. We might not have the resources to be able to there to be a match between our ambitions and the reality of what we can implement. But at the same time, I do agree with him. I think one has to be really aspirational. So perhaps, I'm not suggesting for a moment, Julie, that we add to your workload. But perhaps that notion of looking into the future and being optimistic isn't such a bad thing.
I think it's opportune because our SEND strategy runs to the end of 2024. And the budget is a financial expression of our policy, isn't it? So, we are going to want to look at what's our ambition for our young people moving forward. And so it's a great opportunity to align the resources with the things that are in the policy. We'll want to co-produce that policy as professionals within the system, with our partners in the NHS, but also with our families. We'll be saying to them, what's the future look like for your children? What do you want us to deliver for them? And I think preparing them for their adult lives is going to be right through the core of it. High Needs Block Working Group will have lots of work to do.
Okay, all right. Any other questions on this? Okay, great. So 4 of us to note, 5.1, the DSG to carry forward position. 5.2, just level of school balances. I want to read schools 3-year budget plan positions that will come to the next forum meeting. Thanks very much for that. Move on to A5, recommendations from the finance block review group. Julie.
Thank you. I'll just summarise the conversation from the high needs block group. If I take you to paragraph 3.2, we've talked about the top up for Kensington Queensmill, as Anita has rightly flagged. You know, this is our maintained special school that is meeting the needs of our young people with autism who, prior to its opening, would have had to have gone to very expensive independent sector provision. It's had its first Ofsted inspection. We're really pleased to be able to celebrate that external validation of what we know is a great offer for our families. We discussed here in January what kind of top up they would need to balance their budget moving forward. We'd wanted to make it very clear to the ESFA and the DFE that we weren't prepared to pay a historic loan that related to before the school was open. So we bring back a recommendation today that the right top up for the school should be 28,000, and we're proposing that because they've been waiting patiently for the decision that it should be backdated to the start of the financial year. So that's paragraph 3.2.
Can I just say, Julie, it says there, this, I would add in that last sentence, but 3 out from the bottom, this may mirror the increase
Oh yes, sorry.
in Hammersmith and Fulham. I
Yeah.
mean, we don't want to, we haven't got a crystal ball, so we don't want to.
We understand that they're looking at that figure, but yeah, they confirmed it. Yeah, thank you.
Julie, just on that point, is it worth mentioning that the loan issue that you reported to me for last time, that's not?
It's not included on it there.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
28,000 is their cost
Austin
without that.
Academy Trust negotiation with the DFE to drop that.
We understand, yeah.
Who's in negotiation?
But they were trying to dump the loan on RBKC that the school
The
had.
Queensmill Trust
Yeah.
is likely to be moving to a new trust, which will be Ormiston Academy. This is a
Right.
conversation happening. Ormiston understand our position and have made it very clear as part of the terms of taking on the schools
Yeah,
that they will not be taking on the historic. So
right.
And it's probably worth adding as well, there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
While it's through the pre-election period, with a final decision being taken that Queensmill, Kensington Queensmill would move into Ormiston Academies Trust. Already there is a service level agreement in place between Ormiston and the Queensmill Trust. And I think that they've been really transparent, open book approach. So I think Ormiston, working with Queensmill, have come up with the 28k figure. They've been really open with us how they
Yeah,
put that
they
figure
have,
together. It's really clear that there is no loan repayment involved in that calculation. And we are expecting the DFE to make the decision for Queensmill to join Ormiston soon.
thank you. So
Thank
from the other discussion at the high needs block group, in para 3.5, there was a recommendation for more investment in early intervention for early years children. So, you know, how can we support our very
Yeah, sorry, I just wondered what SLCN was.
speech, language and communication needs?
Thank you.
Thank you. In para 3.6, we've opened this term new provision for children with social, emotional, mental health and communication needs in it's going to be known as Preston Junction. It hasn't had its official opening yet, again, because we're in an election period. That's now deferred to the end of term. But what we want to do, paragraph 3.7, is extend the offer to primary age children. Preston is a secondary provision. And then in para 3.8, the group recommended more occupational therapy. Heads in the room will recognise how difficult it is to get some of those services at the moment and what difference it will make if there is more. So part of the kind of conversation about, you know, what would we do if we had more resources, we've already been given a very clear steer by heads in terms of 2 things that we should be looking to develop. The other paragraph in this report that I'd like to draw attention to is 5.1, and that's just setting out the grant allocation for the TPIC that each of our specialist settings.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Any questions from Julie on the seven paper?
I just wondered, Julie, in 3.3, you say 43% of the places for the existing places are filled by non-residents,
Yeah.
boys of Central Westminster. What's the criteria for admission? It isn't all K and C filled up and then
No, unfortunately, under the Greenwich judgment, which from the 1980s that applies to mainstream, it's exactly the same as special. You can't earmark places for your own residents. So, you know, you can have effective early identification and early conversations about who might be going in, so that the places are full, well, by the time anybody else comes along. But we're, you know, it's about the timing of the consultation and who's there.
Okay. Yes, Chris.
Thank you. I thought this was a really excellent paper. Thank you very much. At 3.1, you scared that better value for money judgment, but is there a set of quality outcomes, I suppose you call them? How are we making sure that
So for every individual child who's going into that kind of special setting, they've got an individual set of outcomes through their education, health and care plan. So it would be very kind of personalised to what is it that we want for that young person in making that placement. Obviously, each setting is subject to an inspection regime, and we would have a look at the quality of what we're getting for our money. We keep an eye on the attendance every term to make sure that children actually benefiting from what we're paying for.
So that is happening because I still struggle to see how private providers, it costs so much more, you know, but what are we not doing that they do that has that extra cost? So the impact on the children's.
Obviously, there's a range of provision.
Yeah.
At the low incidence, very high cost end, it's residential. It can be 52 weeks a year provision, and it can be jointly with social care and health or one of those partners. So that would not be something that we would cater for in our own school. So that's low incidence, extremely high cost, £500,000 for a year for one placement. At the other end of a scale, where it's higher incidence, lower cost, I think what we do in our outstanding schools is better, but it's about having conversations with families to say to them, you know, come and have a look at our provision. And one of the reasons that we created Preston Junction is because we think we can do it better. And, you know, I'm delighted to say that the families that have been to look, who've been offered it, some of them were seriously considering the independent sector and have changed their minds.
And you're capturing that as you go through the developing these.
And we're also attracting as many parents say, you know, even if they might want an out borough independent school, they don't want a long journey for their child. So if their child is eligible for homeschool, you know, travel care assistance, they'd rather they had a shorter journey. Of course, shorter journeys are local. So they are perhaps going to KQ, mainstream school, or mainstream school with a resource base, and that's another factor. If I could, I'm just going to, I know I mentioned it in the previous conversation, in 2.2, Julie has flagged the increase in the number of flags, but you've also highlighted the fact that there are 114 active assessments. And I know I mentioned it at a heads meeting last week, but definitely that's the highest number, definitely. I think people have gosh, 6 years, Julie, it feels that long. But I think you had a few months ago, where actually said it's the highest number of EHC assessment requests ever. That was across both boroughs. Wanted to flag that because it links to our conversation about, you know, a number of those will be agreed, and you know, a top up will be agreed, and we can see how that goes in terms of high needs blood pressure. You know, what's the type of fuel.
I think we should also recognise that before Julie was appointed, we were going through a crisis. And we were actually not getting assessments through, etc. And you've done a great job, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to be doing that, even you've having even more volume, is appreciated. Thank you.
Really, I agree, you've done a great job. Great support. I was wondering, with more and more young people in inpatient units, more and more young people attempting suicide, what relationship have you got with these CAMs? What support have we got? Because we certainly need more people that are coming into schools, and it's talked about ad nauseum, but it never seems to happen. So what are the plans for that?
Very briefly, we've got an overarching executive board, a SEND executive board, which is made up of all of the partners. It's co-chaired by Health, the ICB, and the local authority. And that is our opportunity to have strategic level conversations about what our partners are bringing to the party. And it's supported by a data dashboard that has the evidence of the number of children. So one of the really powerful things that board's been able to achieve is in our last performance quarter, we've seen that over 12 months wiped off the waiting list for autism diagnosis for 5 to 16-year-olds. And I think it's only because that there's very robust holding each of the partners to account and transparency in that data that's happening. But obviously the health landscape is changing. The introduction of the ICBs, the fact that it covers 8 local authority areas now, means that they are very complex conversations. But NHS is suffering the same as we are in terms of funding and where there's underinvestment. But certainly those conversations happen, and we are holding each other responsible for the needs of our young people.
And I think maybe just to answer Andrew, so particularly on CAMS, I mean, I think we hope as a council to feel that health partners that there's a lot of support, hopefully at an early stage, for our mental health support teams, through our commission support, but where there is a clinical need, absolutely, as Julie says, we're working really hard to help partners to make sure that those assessments are done quickly and then treated discipline. Would we like it to be even quicker? Of course we would. And some of that links, as you say, Julie, to what was really a local arrangement, pretty much around our local authority boundary, a bit of Westminster, to a large 8 local authority network. I mean, compared to other boroughs, we probably do get quicker health assessments and quicker access to a service in other areas, but there are still challenges, and that's one of our areas. As and when we get inspected for SEND and alternative provision, that'll be an area we'll say we're doing a bit better than most, but we think we could do even better, particularly as you say, Jeanette, the increasing prevalence of those severe needs, clinical needs.
Tier 4.
Yeah.
Highly specialised.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions on it? Okay, thank you everyone. The forum was asked to amend the top up the paid cubes to 28,000 from April 24. Yeah, we'll have 72 endorsed proposals for SEMH primary provision outreach in 27. 73, just note the recommendations for investment in early intervention for nursery age children 3-5 on occupational therapy and autism provisions in Power 3.8. Not Power 3.9 is written. Note the 24-25 teacher pension or TPCG allocation to schools, APM hospital providers, with a total of 380,053, and then finally 7.5 note 4.5 for the high needs block reference. Right, A6, schools intervention support fund. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll be fairly brief, but happy to take questions. So 1.1, it sets out what this paper is about. Part of the council review of reserves, led by the corporate finance team, of which Anita is part. Looking at the balance sheet, it was identified that there were some companies linked to what we described here as historic pooled funds from schools. 2.1, it clarifies that sum was £311,000. And again, Anita may want to add to what I've said, but we've really looked into this, and we've not been able, because the transactions go back over 10 years, to identify exactly where the funding originated and what elements of the balance was attributed for particular schools. There's been no movement in this budget for over 6 years. And I think our view was, and we also consulted with our cabinet member and with Sarah Newman, that the fund shouldn't just sit there, that it should be properly put to use. It is non-recurrent. And so the suggestion was to set up a fund that we no longer have. Some of you will recall previous monitoring meetings going back years, there was a small intervention pot to support the local authorities' statutory duty around intervention. The local authority maintained schools. There was no longer. with the reductions in the DSG and the ability to create that fund. And so our proposal here, we welcome views, is that it's in a sense recreate that intervention support pot. It is non-recurrent, and by all means, as you said in 3.1, we've got applications, but because that fund might pretty much be exhausted overnight, given the precious schools that they're facing, we wanted to suggest some fairly clear criteria for eligibility in 4.1, which would be, that very small number of schools identified by Ofsted as judged to be requiring improvement, or by agreement with the school through the work that Shelley's team does with school standards, where there's a shared view that the school may be at risk of requiring improvement. That we're talking about 1 or 2 schools in Preston Chelsea, because we have such high levels of achievement that would be able to bid for a small amount of funding to increase capacity at the school, or to raise standards, to broaden the curriculum. That would be time limited one-off support. So that's the proposal. Alex, anything else you want to say, Anita, about where we've essentially kind of uncovered this? And
I think you covered everything.
so there we go, Chair.
I think given the quantum of funding and how it has to be used, it's a great use putting it into school standards. So just what we should be doing if we get any little pots of money.
I think it's a really good idea. I think the only thing I would add is it worth saying, so I don't know quite how to phrase it, but something about when there's a change of leadership,
Yes.
that might be a particular vulnerability for a school, and that should be worth, helping somebody into that role, or whatever the role is that comes up, because I know that's when schools find it so hard at the moment.
No, that's really opposite. And I think that really links to the second bullet point in 4.1, where a school is saying, perhaps in the change of head, or a governing body is saying, we think perhaps we're more vulnerable, particularly when Ofsted was to come, we think there is a risk we might be judged for requiring improvement. And if then, talking to your legal advisor, there's agreement there. This is for local authority maintained schools, not academies, then that perhaps would be, a criteria.
I wonder if it's worth qualifying it so that people know that that's something they can look for.
Well, we can definitely take that back. I think it's probably fairly clear in our kind of agreed with head teacher school improvement framework what the vulnerable factors are, but no, that's a helpful point. So,
If there was a form, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a form to bid for this. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
But that'll be operational. to sort out.
Any chance that would be backdated for this academic year for those schools that have already invested in leadership?
I think it's
By
difficult.
school standards team.
I think it's difficult to backdate it because of the timing of the decision. I think it is from now. It is.
So what do you use the money on? Consultancy or?
it depends on so definitely schools that are at risk of requiring improvement, very small number, or the 1 or 2 schools that are just requiring improvement, they will have a clear improvement plan. And there may be some costed elements to that plan. So it might be about intensive intervention in years 5 and 6 around the
Right.
It might be, as Sarah said, about some additional leadership capacity. It might be borrowing somebody from another school. Obviously, there'll be cost to that school of that person not being there full time, maybe provide some cover in that school.
There'd be some sort of criteria though around, if the school fulfills the criteria here, a criteria you in regard to the school enjoys a very large revenue balance. Would make sense that somehow then they're also bidding for more money.
Yeah, we don't tend to see schools
In that position.
requiring.
But
There's one on
it's
here.
important, I think, probably to build it into.
There's one on here with a
Yeah.
revenue balance of around 300,000.
Yes,
I suppose the issue there is in-year costs and access to those sorts of funds, and then what you're doing is asking this potentially school, hypothetically, that's our right to basically lead to an in-year deficit, which you wouldn't want to do when we could spend some money that we've got.
but
Yeah.
I think
I think I can speak to the school that you're referring to, and that school is planning to invest that money in children because it wasn't able to do that previously, and therefore that carry forward will not be so large going forward. So if that school was able to access money to provide some support to children right now,
Yeah, it needs it in year. Really, that's what
Yeah,
I'm saying. It needs it.
Absolutely, and it needs it now.
Exactly.
Thanks.
So, let's not split hairs on this. I mean, it's in the grand scheme of the DSG, and what we're talking about. If we start opening this up to wider bids, it's going to be useless.
Yeah.
We need it to have some tangible use.
And it is not recurrent.
Exactly.
How are we assessing who may require improvement? I mean, I've said if you've been Ofsted, right, fair enough, but.
Yes, so that obviously we don't, you know, we do have a duty around intervention if schools are of concern. Part of that work through the school improvement framework is to work with you to ask you to share openly with Shelley's team your self-evaluation. You know, what grade do you think you would get if Ofsted came, what your vulnerabilities are, and often there's an assessment and hopefully you find to be a professionally, you know, supportive and challenging conversation with legal advice. So I've looked at your data and I think you're here, but you know, I can think of very few instances, Alison, where there hasn't been an agreed view between Shelley's team and teachers who are in the room or governors about Karen may give a view.
Say it does happen. Very rare, but it does happen.
But
Not on the side of school standards.
there we go.
School standards has its formula and it does work. I would say to make sure that schools are ensuring best outcomes for children, so they do step in as and when needed.
Thanks, Karen. I think that then adds to hopefully there's alignment to say actually the school might be vulnerable. Obviously, the inspection framework changes every few years. So there's always shifting standards, but that be the kind of conversation that would happen.
And to ask perhaps a difficult question here, you haven't got Department of Education breathing down your neck so much that you better way of doing this would be to put it towards the deficit.
No, because it's not, it's absolutely not part of the DSG.
It's not part of the
No.
DSG. Okay, fine, thank you.
Great. Everything? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So just 5.1, just for you to note the school's intervention support funding purpose and eligibility criteria. Thanks, everyone. Right, A7, school funding formula options for consultation. This is a proposal looking into how we're going to operate next year. Obviously, contingent on what we see happening in the next few months with the government. So, Anita.
Yeah, so thank you, Andrew. And as you say, this is based on status quo in terms of funding and assuming minimum funding guarantee stays the same level. I don't, whether anything will change in the timeline that we would need to make a decision for next year, perhaps wouldn't be that likely. So I think this is just planning the consultation. We can obviously, if we need to change it, we can, but it's just agreeing the options for consultation in the autumn. So there's no decision made tonight that's going to affect how funding is distributed or what the total of that funding would be, but rather, are you happy with the three options for consultation?
I mean, I think we just have to mark this in all autumn term. That's the timeline is probably the most important thing for us here.
Yeah.
Right, should we move on?
Do we know, or has there been any back chatter as to should possibly there be a change of government, whether the incoming government is committed to the fairer funding, sort of whole fairer funding set up, or are they going to be reviewing it?
I mean,
review everything, but I don't think I'll get rid of the NFF. I think someone's right.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you say that you shouldn't fund all schools across the country on the same
basis? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So on that forum, 611, 612, 613, it's pretty straightforward that we're not in agreement. Yes. Great. Okay. A8. The scheme for financing schools.
Excitement.
You're very long way for this one. So this this piece is just seeking approval to consult with Macon Schools on some proposed changes to the scheme for financing school. There's three changes we've got in this update, and that's in the table on the second page. The first update is just regarding IFRS 16 and essentially just means that from the 1st of April, all leases
you need to be consented to, and the DFE published a general consent for common property, plant and equipment, which they sent out in the schedule that we emailed all the schools. I don't think there's going to be any issues for any of the schools with that. The second change in 2.1.2, it just gives some further information and just clarity about what was already in the scheme around the submission of financial information reports to our seniors. And the third is a very minor revision in 3.2 to reflect the frequency of early years payments from termly to monthly to be understood within the previous year, though, because we've been doing that for the last year at least. That's it. We will bring we haven't put anything in about the balancing conformism that was agreed at last forum, just because it's not effective until 26/27, but we will bring.
So we'll be discussing that next second engineering.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Any questions on that one? Okay.
Sorry.
It's the first time. Oh, you've actually made notes.
In 5.1, it's not for proposed amendments, the existing policy. You talk about incomplete evidence. And there are some schools, particularly primary schools, who are carrying forward weighty budgets. And it may be that part of those weighty balances that are being carried forward are income from lettings. When we discussed this at the last schools forum, I was very aware to be aware of this, the church schools, be that Catholic or church, don't have to include lettings income in the overall figure that's assessed. Was there any proposal, has there been any discussion about changing the last paragraph of 5.1? Because if non-religious schools, non-church schools, were able to work their finances, and as it says here, place incomes from lettings into voluntary or private funds, then we will be playing, to my mind, on the same playing field. Whereas at the moment, perhaps some schools have made a lot of effort in external lettings, for which in theory it would appear that they're now being penalised.
I think that paragraph needs rewording to factor in how church schools can deal with funds based on the church budgets. Privately owned.
Absolutely. Because you're effectively dealing with everybody on certain percentages with the carry forward figures, and yet the percentages are different totals. Totals are calculated in different ways. Which to my mind doesn't seem quite fair.
The end of the sentence just needs to say except for voluntary aided schools. Or
Voluntary aided schools have that amount of income deducted from the overall assessment figure as church schools do.
you don't have it deducted though.
Or not taken into account.
It automatically goes. So we're exempted from that sentence. Should we pick that up outside of this meeting?
Yeah.
I think
So-
it's it's a really good spot.
Yeah, it hasn't been on the back of our, we are aware of that.
I've got two, just one's a typo, but we did that come on to that. So page 21, 2.14, capital expenditure. I just think where it says, that no capital works can take place without the express authorization of the local authority. I just think it just needs one sentence, or maybe two, just to explain what's the difference between your perception precisely of where something does become authentically a capital project as opposed to a premises improvement. It's quite minor sort of works. It's very sort of there's a sort of grey area of what's just very minor improvement and what actually becomes then building works. So I think that's not clear here. And the typos on page 22, 2.15, where it's just in red. For some reason, the word requires. Purpose of this provision is to enable the authority to set out formally any concern it has regarding the financial management of the school it maintains and requires. But the letter S is in red.
Okay, thank you. I can't take that one.
It's minor, but detailed.
With the capital one, it's definitely something we can put in the next version of the scheme. I think it'll be more than a couple of sentences there to define, but I think what we can do is just guide you to the right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's like where there's a modest.
There is
There is-
guidance
there
on
is
how to
guidance.
Begin.
Yeah.
So you can't really supersede that. So I think it maybe just needs to refer to.
I think what I can do is just guide,
You might be able to reference the document that
Yes.
Alan did as well. Because there's a document about and making distinction between schools where you're the landlord and you're not the
Yeah.
landlord.
So
Yeah.
that's the handbook, the property handbook.
Yeah, so we had a version of that on our services and schools website. I'll just make sure it's definitely still on there, and so we've got another link into that as well. Yeah.
There's definitely something I think we could state, whoever the landlord is, about, you know, what schools are responsible for, and often that's that small pot of devolved capital that you have, as opposed to the funds that the landlord receives, whoever they may be, sometimes as to carry out what was called bricks and mortar works.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. Any other questions on that? Okay, great, thank you. Right, forum is asked to go on reviewing the updated scheme and speed to be facilitated on and maintain schools, obviously with the events mentioned. Forum want to note the outcome of the consultation will be reflected in the next issue. And forum to note that the previously agreed plans control mechanism will be included in the future scheme update proposal. Okay, any other business?
Yeah.
Peter?
Schools place, paper on schools places. Is that coming November or have you penned it?
So it will do. So obviously I think it was the start of the year when the Anthony brought the latest projections.
Right.
So we're bringing them back again in the normal way. So at the moment, should be doing what the DfE requires us, which is our school capacity annual projections. That will feed through to the DfE, and then we'll also look at other data. So you know, who's on roll in September, particularly around reception numbers, and we'll bring that back in the autumn in the usual way.
Thank you.
The DfE releases its annual admissions data, I think, this week or start next week, so we'll see what is going on across this school organisation.
Okay.
Ian, was there anything else?
Well, there is an AOB for me. Now, Jeanette, always correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not wrong, I think this may be your last meeting, Jeanette. So,
I was going to say, yes, that's my last meeting.
well, I'm going to rather cheekily say something and acknowledge that. And thank you, Jeanette, and the hospital school for all of your hard work on behalf of the children who can't be in mainstream school and Sporting Forum. I would say over a long time, you've got all your experience. So it's a chance for me and for local authority police here to say thank you and to wish you well.
Thank you. So thank you for all your support, and thank you, Ian, for our new school, which is already full to bursting.
Your new community provision at St Charles. So I hope you feel it's part of the legacy, Jeanette, that's in
I'm very
place.
still with it, yeah.
Lovely.
Fantastic, okay. Brilliant, okay, right, thanks everybody, that concludes the schools forum.
Thank you.
I know you've got the Sussex back.
Yeah.